Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 91 of the Tick Bootcamp podcast. The title of today's interview is The Artist, the Yogi, and the Lymie, an interview with Stela Sulzdorf. My name is Richard Johannesson.
And I'm Matt Sabatello.
Today's podcast guest is Stela Sulzdorf. Stela Sulzdorf is a 30-year-old artist, yoga practitioner, and social media influencer from the United Kingdom. Ms. Sulzdorf initially started to experience the symptoms of a tick disease when she was just 20 years old. She believed that they were triggered by her eating disorder. Ms. Sulzdorf was forced to drop out of the prestigious University of Arts, London, because she couldn't concentrate and was too fatigued to attend class. Her health declined even further in 2016 when she started to have flu-like symptoms and throat infections. She also developed chest pain, knee issues, and started to have seizures and facial palsy. Ms. Sulzdorf was forced to depend on a wheelchair and her husband. When she finally received a positive Lyme disease diagnosis in February of 2019, she was prescribed doxycycline. Ms. Sulzdorf had terrible Herxheimer reactions that increased her seizures. Ms. Sulzdorf is still in the beginning phase of her treatment journey and is finding what methods work best for her and her body to fight Lyme. Hey, Stela, and welcome to the program.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
We're really blessed to have you, Stela, and we'd like you to begin by sharing with our listeners where you're from and what you do.
So I am in the United Kingdom and I'm unemployed. I'm at work, but I spend a lot of my time doing yoga and I do a lot of things on Instagram. I spend a lot of my time on Instagram talking about yoga and my Lyme journey.
So Stela, did you grow up in the UK or is that a place where you recently moved to?
So I've been living in the UK for over 20 years. I've been here for a really long time, but I'm actually from Bulgaria. I was born there and my whole family is from there. So my whole childhood I spent in Bulgaria and then we moved to England.
So what was your childhood like in Bulgaria? Did you spend a lot of time in the woods or in the forest, or were you living in a more urban setting?
No, I was living in a very small town. So it was just lots of greenery, lots of fields. My granddad actually had like a small ranch and he looked after cows, sheep, goats. I remember always being around these farm animals when I was younger. And I was always running around outdoors, just doing what normal kids do, just constantly being outdoors.
Now, do you recall at any time during your childhood coming in contact with ticks or being bitten by a tick?
I didn't even know what ticks were, to be honest. Ticks weren't even something I had heard of until I found out I had Lyme disease. But I mean, I was getting bitten by bugs all the time when I was younger. I think being around the fields and around the country and that kind of thing, I was constantly getting bitten by bugs. And, I'd see bite marks and things like that, but it never really bothered me because it was just something that was common. So I guess I don't recall being bitten by ticks, but I was bitten a lot by things like horseflies, mosquitoes, that kind of thing.
Now, are you aware of whether or not there are tick challenges in Bulgaria today?
Oh, yes. Funny thing, now that I know that I have Lyme disease, I've actually found out that Bulgaria is one of the biggest Lyme-prone areas in the world, and I never knew that. And even when I speak to my parents and family members, like, none of them were like, oh, what's that? They all knew what it was because they all knew somebody who had it at some point and things like that. So it's very well known in Bulgaria where I'm from, but just it wasn't something that I had discussed when I was a child or anything like that, and not something I had learned about. And I guess because I moved to England when I was quite young, it just never came up because I moved to a city. And yeah, here it's all just like hustle and bustle and busyness and shops.
Share with us what caused you to immigrate from Bulgaria to the UK, and how old were you when you made that move?
So if I remember correctly, I was about 6 or 7 years old. I was very young, and it was a communist time, and my parents were really young, and it was really hard to get work in Bulgaria. And my parents just moved to England for a better life, like most people did in communist times. It's not really something that I kind of paid too much attention to because they did a really good job of making sure that it didn't really affect myself and my brother. They made it out like we were going to England for this fun new adventure, and we were going to start school in England and all this stuff. Yeah, it was like an exciting thing when I was a kid to move to a different country. Yeah.
So what was your childhood experience like after you left Bulgaria and then you moved to the UK?
Oh, it was really difficult because I couldn't speak the language. And I was put into school, and I remember I was struggling so much because I couldn't understand a word of what people were saying. And looking back now, I think, how did I even cope in school? But I guess children pick up languages really quickly because I picked up English quite fast. And I was one of those kids that used to talk so much. And yeah, I'd always be the one putting my hand up in class, wanting to answer the questions and stuff like that. I was really good at doing my homework and all that kind of stuff. My parents used to always make sure that they gave us classes after school, as in they taught us. They didn't bring anyone else in. They were teaching us even when we came back from school. They were teaching us English and how to read and write and all this outside of what we were already doing in school.
Would you describe your childhood in England to be a very typical childhood where you were healthy and happy and doing all the things that all of your peers are doing at that time?
Yeah, I really had a very normal childhood. Aside from the language struggle, I still had friends, I still went out, we still had going out to the park dates and stuff like that from what I remember, and yeah, very normal.
So what were your dreams? What were your goals as you were growing up in the UK? What were you seeking to pursue in your adult life?
Well, I was very good at things like sports. In fact, I was very into trampolining, which is a type of gymnastics. I did that for a number of years. I was also really into tennis. Myself and my brother used to play tennis a lot. So I was very into physical stuff, and I wasn't sure whether I was going to take the physical route or something in the creative route, because I was also really good at drawing and making things. I was very much into fashion, that kind of thing. So yeah, I was kind of going back and forth between the two, but when I did all my GCSEs, I'm not sure what you call them in the States, but I think it's like the end of high school, I'm not sure. My exam results, I did really, really well in textile design and fashion and that kind of stuff. And so I decided that that was what I wanted to pursue. I wanted to go down the creative route, and my dream was to kind of be in fashion, be a fashion designer, work in the fashion industry, and just be creative, that kind of thing. That was my goal. But at the same time, I was always staying active. That was just always a passion of mine, no matter what I was going to be doing. I was doing yoga and all that kind of stuff, going to the gym.
So did you ultimately go on to formal education after you graduated from high school to pursue these dreams?
Yeah, so I actually got into University of the Arts London, which is one of the top universities in the world, actually, to study textile design for fashion. And I didn't realize what a big of a deal it was at the time, but they only accept 40 people. And within those 40 people, they only accepted 10 international students. So I was one of 30 people in the UK that they accepted. But just at the time, I didn't grasp how much of a big deal that was. So I was really good at what I did. I was very creative, very good at making clothes and drawing and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, so I started, I did a year and a half. And at the year and a half mark, that's when things started to get really bad and I started to struggle.
When did you begin to first show the symptoms of what you now know to be a tick disease?
I think I was roughly around 20 years old. At the time, I don't think I realized that all of this could be related or it could be due to a tick disease, because I had gone through an eating disorder. I was suffering with anorexia for 11 years prior to having any symptoms. And I was undergoing, like I was in recovery. I was in recovery at that time. And in my head, I was thinking, well, I'm experiencing all this because I'm in recovery and it's probably normal. And my doctor was telling me it's normal to feel this way. And so that's kind of what was going through my head. But the first kind of symptoms I started to get were extreme fatigue. And the fatigue was so intense that it didn't matter if I went to bed at 9 p.m. I just couldn't wake up the next day. I mean, I would wake up, but I would sleep through my alarm and I would just constantly go in late. But yeah, still a part of me in my head was thinking, well, this course is really intense. I'm going through my eating disorder recovery. So you could see how I didn't really pick up on the signs back then.
Well, Stella, one of the things that we've seen with many of our podcast guests is that anorexia seems to be a part of many Lyme disease journeys. I'm wondering whether or not you believe that the eating disorder was a symptom of your tick disease, or did the eating disorder cause you to have a traumatic event that then caused the Lyme disease to become chronic?
Well, through this Lyme journey that I've been trying to uncover with my Lyme literate doctor that I'm now seeing, I believe that I was bitten as a child and that the Lyme has been dormant in my body. Now, I obviously can't prove that, but it's what I believe by the symptoms and everything I've been through. And because anorexia is so tough on the gut, when I think back now, I can't even believe I put myself through that with the whole eating disorder, because I'm fully recovered now from my anorexia. But now when I look back, I realize how damaging it is to your whole body, how it suppresses your immune system and how it damages your gut. And therefore, I feel that I put my body through trauma and therefore made me susceptible to Lyme disease.
So Stella, are you really sure that your Lyme disease didn't cause the anorexia, and maybe you're being a little bit hard on yourself and beating yourself up about having had that challenge when it was really, in fact, just the early symptomology of your tick disease?
Well, it's not actually something I thought about, but you're right, because one of the reasons why I developed an eating disorder was because every time I would eat, I would feel sick. And it was crazy because growing up, I never had issues with food. And in Bulgaria, we have like a Mediterranean diet, and it's very balanced and very healthy. And all of a sudden, I started getting these gut issues where I would eat and I would look like I'm pregnant. That's the only way to describe it. And it would happen with anything I would eat. And I would feel nauseous and I just would feel awful after I ate. And so over time, I just stopped eating. And I think it just goes down that spiral. It's very possible.
I think it's very likely, and it's only because we've now done almost 100 interviews, and a very large number of people that we've interviewed have had these similar problems, and almost everyone has had food sensitivities as a part of their Lyme journey. So I'm anxious for you to prey on that and determine whether or not you're just being a little bit harder on yourself than you should be, and recognize that, in fact, that was really an early part of the symptoms of your tick disease, and then, of course, they just took off once your immune system was destroyed and your gut was destroyed.
Yeah, that's definitely food for thought for me, because I never even looked at it that way round. But now that I'm thinking about it, it makes total sense.
So Stella, talk to us more about your symptoms and how they developed throughout your college years.
So as I mentioned, the first thing I experienced was extreme fatigue. And the funny thing is it kind of happened overnight, because I always had so much drive and so much energy for the things I was passionate about. But all of a sudden, I was just fatigued. It was just tiredness to the point where I just wanted to sleep and be in bed all the time. That then kind of led to really bad migraines, because I was pushing myself past that fatigue, and I was pushing myself to go to uni and pushing myself to do the studies and all that I needed to do. And it was giving me awful migraines. My memory became horrific. I couldn't remember my deadlines. I couldn't remember what I had to do when. I started really falling behind with my work. And yeah, that was kind of the first kind of signs that I experienced when I was at university.
These early symptoms, Stella, seem to be sort of alarming. You're not able to sleep. You're having these forgetful moments where you can't remember simple things. Were you seeing any doctors at this point?
Well, I was still seeing, well, I don't know if you'd call them a doctor, but a therapist for my eating disorder. I was seeing them fairly frequently, but because I was getting better in terms of the way I was eating, my gut issues weren't getting better, and I was still having problems with my stomach, but I was forcing myself to eat. So in that respect, I was getting better in their terms. So I was seeing a therapist for my eating disorder, but other than that, not really, no. I saw my GP on and off to explain to him about these symptoms, but each time I went to him, he always reverted it back to, well, it's probably because of your eating disorder, or it's anxiety, or it's depression because of your eating disorder. And it was always that. And so it got to the point where I just didn't bother to go see him unless I really had to see him for something.
And of course, your symptoms progressed as your college career went on and escalated to a point that you then eventually had to actually step down from school. So can you walk us through your symptom progression up until that point when you had to leave college?
Oh, I wasn't able to keep up with the work. Everyone was way ahead of me. The worst thing is I didn't even realize how far behind I was until my tutor sat me down and was like, you're one of our best students. I don't understand what's going on. All of a sudden, you've fallen behind. You're not keeping up. You're just really not where you should be. And that was the first time it hit me that, oh, this isn't in my head. I actually am suffering, and it's affecting my studies. So yeah, with that on board, I tried my best to catch up, to do what I could, but it was just too much. I had fallen too far behind by that point, and I wasn't lazy. I really wasn't. I always had this drive and this passion to do whatever I needed to do to follow my dreams. And I just, no matter what I did, I just couldn't catch up. And I had a meeting with my supervisors and I explained to them, look, I'm going through a rough time right now. I'm really struggling. Perhaps I need to take some time out to just focus on myself and then come back. And so we arranged for me to take a year out, and I had every hope in me to go back the following year to finish off my degree because I had gone so far already. And yeah, that year I only got worse. That year that I was out, I only got worse, and I didn't get any answers, and I didn't really get any help from my doctor, my GP. So I never ended up going back.
So Stella, to put this into perspective for our listeners, this was an over 10-year journey from the time you first got sick until your diagnosis. And now we're sort of approaching the middle part of that window. And at this point, you think it's all in your head and you're having stress and anxiety and recovering from your eating disorder. So you now step down from school to try to get yourself straight and then return back to college. But your symptoms progress. It sounds like you may have picked up a job as well in that period. And can you walk us through how your symptoms progressed and how your now professional life was affected by these symptoms as well?
Well, when I first left university, I did go back to my doctor and I said, I really need help because I've taken a time off from uni to help myself. And his only response was, I'm going to refer you to therapy CBT. So not eating disorder related, but general CBT. That was kind of the resolution he had to help me. I never got that CBT. I was put on a waiting list and I never got it. And it had been 6 months at that point. I'm assuming it's the same in the USA, but with our health service, there's always long waiting lists. So they give you like a date, but you never really know if they're going to meet that date that they tell you. And it had been 6 months and I wasn't working, I wasn't at uni, and I really needed to make money because I was living with my parents, which wasn't ideal. And I was basically, they were paying for me for everything. And so I needed to get a job, and I applied for everything. And because I didn't have a degree, I hadn't completed it, I wasn't really taken seriously by anyone. And I don't know, by some luck or something, I found a library job, which is not something I would have ever even thought about going into, but I was desperate at that point. I really needed a job. I found a job at a local library and it sounded perfect. I thought, libraries are quiet, I can sit down, it's just books. Oh, I was so wrong. It was a very, very busy public library, and it was on a main high street. And so it was full of people. I was constantly doing events, going to schools, hosting meetings and things like that. And then I just started to get very, very dizzy. A couple of times I fainted at work, just like that. I just would get dizzy and faint. And yeah, I started to get really bad anxiety because I was worried that I was going to faint at work. So I started to get really bad anxiety. And then, yeah, I had so many meetings about why does this keep happening and why don't I have a medical reason to why this is happening. And I just couldn't give them a medical reason because I didn't have answers myself. And so they couldn't help me because I didn't know what was wrong with me. So it was just a very difficult situation.
So Stella, as this 10-year window now is progressing deeper and deeper to the latter end of it, you now are getting worse and worse and worse. You're having these now neurological symptoms. You're having seizures. You're fainting. Did you make a decision now to step down or at least reduce your hours at work to try to figure out what was going on with your health?
Yeah, so I had a meeting with my manager and we both decided that it would be a good idea for me to go part-time. And still in my head, I was thinking, perhaps all my symptoms are because this job is really challenging and it's really demanding. And perhaps I've just got burnout or something that a lot of people get sometimes in demanding jobs. And I thought, well, let's go part-time and see if this helps me. I went part-time for about 6 months and absolutely nothing changed. It was as if I didn't even go part-time. I didn't even notice the difference, which is really weird to say. And a lot of that time where I went part-time, I've kind of like blacked out because I don't even remember most of it. It's just like there's lots of pockets where I don't even remember what happened during that time when I went part-time.
About how many years into your journey are you now? Now you're part-time, you're getting worse and worse and worse. Is this 5 years in, 6 years in, 8 years in? How many years in from being sick?
About 5 years. Yeah.
And 5 years into your health journey, you still think that this is mental health related to try to reduce your stress and to try to just attack it from a psychological perspective, not an actual physical perspective. Is that accurate?
Yeah. Yeah. Because, you know, my doctor was saying to me, well, you're young, you're fit, you're healthy, you're doing all the right things. It can't be anything other than anxiety and depression. And I was thinking, well, he's a doctor. He knows best. I'm not medically trained. He must be right. That's literally what I was thinking.
Since you're now at the 5-year mark and nothing has been improving, are your doctors prescribing you things for what they perceive to be a mental health illness?
Well, they tried to, but because I had been on fluoxetine, which is an antidepressant, for many years when I had my eating disorder, it wasn't something I was willing to go back on because anyone who's been on those kinds of antidepressants for a long time will know how difficult it is to come off of them. And it was so difficult to come off of it that I was just not willing to put myself back on it again, especially as I don't believe that that drug was helping me. So he offered to prescribe me antidepressants, but I didn't want to take it. And so there was nothing else put on the table or advised to me.
Well, and of course, the antidepressants that they were offering to you weren't working because you weren't depressed. You were suffering from Lyme disease. So it makes perfect sense that
Yes.
you, looking back, of course, that your instincts were right and you shouldn't have been taking that drug again. So, Stela, what we like to explore with our guests at this point in their journey is how the developing symptoms are affecting you socially. We know that you weren't able to go to school. And now I'd like you to talk to us about how things are going with your family and your friends. How were things going for you socially?
To be fair, I have got a very supportive family, so I'm very lucky in that respect. But my family does not have a history of eating disorders. And in general, I guess I'm very lucky that my family doesn't have any serious illness in the line, maybe really far along, but my immediate family is generally very healthy. So they were not very understanding of my eating disorder because it's just culturally, it's not something that happens in Bulgaria. But in saying that, they were very supportive. But because of my job and trying to deal with all these Lyme symptoms that I was having and trying to deal with this job, when it came to the weekend, I was spending all my weekends in bed. I was not able to go out. I would finish work and I would crash out. So when it came to the weekend, there was just no way I was able to do anything. My weekends were my recovery time. So when it came to family events, birthdays, anything like that, I just wasn't able to go because I just didn't have it in me. And a lot of my family thought I didn't go because I was depressed or I didn't want to eat food at this event because of my previous eating disorder and stuff like that. And I remember having conversations with like family members and things saying, you know, if you come to the event, you don't have to eat this, you know, it would still be nice to see you. So I knew that it was a thing where they thought that my issues were due to anxiety and depression and everything to do with an eating disorder, which just, it wasn't true. So, you know, I would get invited to see my friends and stuff like that, and I would cancel. Or I'd have every intention to go. And then because I was so tired and fatigued and migraines and everything, I just couldn't go and I'd cancel last minute. And so I lost so many friends in the process. I just became really isolated. And yeah, other than my job that was part-time, I was just at home. Yeah, it just affected everything.
You are not alone in this, unfortunately. So many people with Lyme disease go through similar experiences where people just don't understand or can't understand what's wrong with them and think that it's something else. And that's one of the reasons we do this podcast, is to raise awareness, to help change that stigma in the world moving forward. Now, over the next 5-year period of your symptoms before your diagnosis, we do know from your pre-interview questionnaire that you even had to stop working part-time, and your symptoms developed even worse to the point where you were homebound and debilitated. So can you walk us through the progression of symptoms from that 5-year mark up to the 10-year mark when you got diagnosed, and how your symptoms brought you basically down to being bedridden?
Yeah, so I got to the point where part-time was too much. I couldn't cope. But mentally, I was saying to myself, I need to do this. I need to pay my bills. I need to do this. But I guess work has their own rules and things they need to abide by. I didn't have any evidence that I was sick that I could provide to them. And so together, we devised that I should take redundancy, because we kind of had a meeting and they were saying, well, it's not looking good for you. And if you don't take redundancy, well, you're going to be let go of. So it's better for you to take the redundancy. And in a way, I didn't have a choice. And I just knew at that point I had no choice. I had to give up work. My manager was really nice in a sense. She was saying to me, you know, you need to try and fight for your case. You need to find out what's wrong with you, all this stuff. But I was so tired. I just didn't have energy to fight for myself.
Walk us through the point where you were homebound and you were dependent on your husband and others just to get through the day and function.
Once I left work, I I was still able to do a few things, like I was able to, make food for myself and shower, but that was it. So these are the simple tasks that I was able to do. Other than that, I was just in bed. And it's all I was doing for a large period of time. My husband said to me, let's go on holiday and see your family. It will be nice for you. You're in your house all the time. Because I hadn't seen my family for a few years at that point, because I was just so unwell that traveling was just too much for me. But, I'd been in my house for so long, just cooped up, and I thought, yeah, it'd be so nice. I should just go see my family, take my mind off everything that's going on. So, yeah, we booked tickets to go to Bulgaria to see my family. But in this 6 months that I had been at home, I'm going back on my story now, but in December 2016, my husband and I call this the sick Christmas because I was so sick. I had really bad food poisoning, and it was accompanied by the flu, and it just wouldn't go away. It was so stubborn, it just wouldn't go away. I had a really horrible throat infection. I had really bad impetigo. And for anyone who doesn't know what impetigo is, it's like a type of skin infection that usually is accompanied by a throat infection. And it's not something I ever had before. It was so bad that it was like, if you fall down and graze your knee and you get a scab, it was like that on my whole chin. And my glands were really swollen under my throat. In fact, my glands haven't gone down since December 2016. And so I went to see my GP because I was like, okay, hopefully he can help me with this. I clearly have something going on, in which case he gave me a short course of antibiotics. I think it was for like a week. It was just like your typical antibiotics. He was like, yeah, you've just got like a throat infection, and take this, it will go down. I took it. It didn't go down. Nothing changed. I still had really swollen glands. I still had the impetigo. So I went back to see him, and he said, oh, sometimes people have really swollen glands, and some people have more swollen glands than others, and this will go down on its own. Don't worry. But in the meantime, I'll give you like an antibiotic cream to get rid of this skin infection on your chin. But I was thinking to myself, I never had swollen glands before. It's not something that just came up and just some people have and some people don't have, because I never had this before. But I don't know, I took his word for it, and I was doing the cream. My throat was still swollen. I was still feeling like I had the flu, even though it had been 3 months. The cream helped a little bit with the skin infection, which took, it took a few months for that skin infection to go down, which I don't think is normal. But I didn't go back to see him because I had such a horrible experience with him. But after that bout of, I don't know if it was the flu or food poisoning or what it was that lasted 3 months, I eventually went back to see him, and I said, look, I still feel like I've got the flu. This isn't normal. I don't know how I can function when I was already having such a hard time. I don't know what to do. And then he kind of looked at me and he went, yeah, I think you have something called chronic fatigue syndrome. And I was like, okay, what causes that? What is that? And he said, it's something we don't really understand. It's something people just get in their lives. There's no evidence to say how people get it or what it's about. We just know people get it. The only thing you can do to help yourself is to stay positive. That was his advice to me. And I left, and I was so angry. I remember I was so angry, and I was like crying for days because I thought, wow, he's told me something new that I hadn't heard before, which is this chronic fatigue syndrome. But he's also telling me there's nothing he can do to help me, and I just need to be positive. So
that would really piss me off too.
yeah, I had gotten to the point where I was no longer going to listen to him and believe what he was telling me. I was just to the point where I was just mad. And yeah, not long after that, I got severe chest pains. I thought I was having a heart attack a lot of the time with these chest pains. And it was so bad that my heart was hurting and I was getting really awful heart palpitations. And every time I would stand and sit, I'd get really dizzy. I went back. We found out I have something called POTS. But he also said to me that, you know, the best thing you can do for yourself is to stay positive. Oh, and I almost found it laughable at this point. But, you know, I went home and I was like, okay, I've got these things that I've not heard of, but all I can do is stay positive. Yay, me. And, you know, I was just going back to laying on the sofa all day, being in bed all day. And then I started to get really awful back pain, which the pain was, I can't even describe it. It was like deep in my spine. And if my husband would try to massage it, he just couldn't get to it because it was just that deep into my spine.
So Stela, how did your symptoms progress after this chronic back pain developed?
It just started to spread around my body. It started to go up all the way up my neck. It was getting really difficult to move my head. It was going to my shoulders, and it got so bad that it didn't matter which way I sat, which way I laid, it didn't matter which way I was sitting or laying. It was just excruciatingly painful. So you can imagine that really affected my sleep. I had awful insomnia, even worse than what I already had. So yeah, that was basically my life for quite some time. And my husband really wanted to cheer me up and to do something nice for me. So he suggested that we take a holiday to Bulgaria to see my family, and how it'd be nice for me to just see my family that I hadn't seen in so long because I wasn't well enough, and that, you know, it would just be a nice thing for me. I was a little bit hesitant, but I thought, yeah, it would be nice. It would be nice for me to get away, to move away from this way I'm feeling and to just escape in a way. And so we booked our tickets. We went to Bulgaria. At that point, I was walking with a severe limp. It was really, really bad. And my husband's family and my husband were saying to me, I think you need to start using like a walking stick or crutches because you're not walking right. I just couldn't fathom that in my head, that I was walking that badly, but I would need something like that to support me. But in my head, I was thinking, no, I'm going to be fine. This is probably a bad injury. I don't know why I was thinking that, but I think it was because I was dismissed so much by these doctors that I started to believe that I was imagining it in some weird way when I knew I wasn't. So I managed to get to Bulgaria with this awful limp. My family were like really worried about me, the ones in Bulgaria. And they were like, you do realize you don't walk normal? And I was like, yeah, I know. I think it's an injury. I'm not really sure what I've done. And they had all these fun things planned for us. They wanted to take me to explore places, and we have lots of fun outdoor pools and restaurants and stuff like that. But they wanted to take me, and I couldn't do any of it because I was unable to walk. I was walking around by holding on to walls and like leaning onto things. And it was just awful. That holiday was awful. I mean, it was lovely that I got to see my family, but it was really horrible to see how worried they were for me. And especially since they hadn't seen me for so long, to see me in that way. And yeah, so the holiday was up. I had spent the whole time indoors because I couldn't do anything. I couldn't walk anywhere. And we got on the flight home, and I remember I was walking through the airport, and all of a sudden I got what I could describe as a severe burning in my knees. And prior to this, I hadn't had any knee pain, and it was in both knees, and it literally just felt like my knees were on fire. That's the only way I could describe it. And I was just like, oh my God, am I imagining something new? I don't know what's going on. I was starting to panic, but I kind of knew I had to hold on. I had to get on my flight. I had to get back home. I managed to get on my flight. And then as we landed in London and I was getting off the plane, my knees got even worse and I was unable to walk. I was literally just like holding on to everything in sight to maneuver my way out of the airport. Managed to get onto the train to get back to my house. And as I got off the train, my legs just wouldn't move. And my husband had to carry me home because my legs just wouldn't move. So at that point, I knew something was really, really wrong. I was crying as soon as we managed to get me home. I was crying. I was in so much pain. I honestly couldn't even believe how I made it from the airport in Bulgaria back home to London. I couldn't believe I even made it. I was in agony, but a part of me was hoping that I was going to go to sleep and I was going to wake up and I was going to be fine. And I woke up and it was even worse. I can't even describe to you how bad it was. The pain was so bad. I couldn't even bend or straighten my legs. They were stuck. And my husband had to literally that day go out to the shops and buy me crutches so that I could do simple things like go to the bathroom. And that was the moment I realized that, yeah, something is really, really wrong. Ever since that day, I've not been able to walk. That was in August 2018, and we're now in 2020, coming up to spring, and I'm still not able to walk, still on crutches, still having knee issues.
So let's talk about how that continued on, because that was in August of 2018, and it was about a year and a half later you got your Lyme diagnosis. So it sounds like you continued to develop even more severe symptoms after that. Can you walk us through what those symptoms were?
Well, my throat infection came back. It was really severe. If you looked, you could see it from the front of me, but if you looked at me from the side, I looked like I had a double chin. It was really severely swollen. The impetigo came back. I developed really severe seizures. So I started getting seizures about twice a week at that point. Whereas prior to that, they were happening, but they were rare. And so I started developing seizures really frequently. I started to get really strange twitching in my face, and I would have episodes where I would lose speech. I just would go blank and I couldn't talk. And sometimes that could last for hours. I got really severe numbness all around my body, burning, and I would get what I describe as what feels like bugs crawling under my skin. And it was constant. It was like bugs were crawling all under my skin. And the best way I could describe the pain is, I still say it this way to this day. I say I'm getting shot, because when I get like a sudden surge of pain, it literally feels like somebody has shot me. And I've never been shot in my life, but if I was to imagine getting shot, that's what it would feel like. That's what was happening. And so because of all of these issues, I was completely bedbound. I was completely bedbound for 10 months, unable to do anything. I was severely light sensitive, severely sound sensitive. My bed sheets were hurting me. Even any which way I was laying was hurting me. The pillow was hurting my head. I was getting severe ringing in my ears all the time. these shocks of pain kept coming and going, the seizures, everything. It was just horrific. And honestly, when I try to think about that now, I almost can't believe I endured that. I felt like I was dying. That's literally what it felt like.
So Stella, at this point, did you still personally believe that this was all in your head and psychological?
No. At that point, no, there was no chance. I still didn't know what was wrong with me, but I knew that something was seriously wrong.
So it sounds like this was your turning point where you decided that you weren't going to listen to your national health system's rheumatologist that you were seeing at this point, who said that it was still all in your head, and you sought a private doctor, a private rheumatologist, who ultimately ended up diagnosing you with Lyme disease.
Well, actually, I did see the National Health Service rheumatologist, and they didn't tell me it was all in my head. They saw me for 10 minutes. They actually told me that they're running late, their schedule is late, and that they have to see me really quickly because there's loads of people after me. And they rushed through my appointment, and the woman saw me for about 10 minutes. They didn't ask for blood work. They didn't ask for my history. They didn't ask for anything. She saw me for 10 minutes and told me that I have fibromyalgia and anxiety and depression. And I was so confused because she didn't examine me. She didn't ask for my history. She didn't ask for blood work. And when she said that I have fibromyalgia, I went home and I did my own research. And I said, no, this doesn't fit with the seizures and this type of pain that I have and the swelling in my knees and all these other things. And I decided to take matters into my own hands and find a private rheumatologist at a private hospital outside of the NHS, which, by the way, is really difficult. In the UK, there are very few rheumatologists. And yeah, I managed to find one. And I was so happy because they were willing to see me within about 2 weeks, which is almost unheard of. But obviously, when you're private, they see you quickly. And I talked him through my symptoms and we had a discussion. He also thought that I didn't have fibromyalgia. He said my symptoms are not consistent with fibromyalgia and that my symptoms sound like it could be lupus, which is an autoimmune disease, or rheumatoid arthritis. And I didn't know anything about autoimmune diseases at that point. And I said, okay, sure. His plan for me was to do a test, testing me for all the autoimmune diseases he could think of, and that we were going to go from there. But in the meantime, he had put me on steroids until the blood work came back, because I think it took about 2 weeks to come back. But he wanted to put me on steroids to kind of ease my symptoms. And whilst I was on these steroids, my symptoms got even worse, which I didn't even believe they could get worse. But obviously now I know that if you take steroids when you have Lyme disease, it actually makes your symptoms worse. But yeah, so I got the call back that my results were back and to come and see him. And I saw him and everything was negative. And I was like, oh my God, everything is negative. I couldn't believe it. I said, what the hell is going on with me? I couldn't believe it. And he said to me, you know what? I don't even know what to tell you. He said to me, the only other thing I can possibly think of that you could possibly have is Lyme disease. But he said, I don't understand how you could have that because it doesn't exist in England. And I've never had a Lyme patient in the 30 odd years I've been working as a doctor. And he asked me if I had seen a rash, if I remember being bitten by a tick, all of which I said no to. He asked me if I'd been hiking or anything like that, all of which I said no to. And he was like, there's no point to even give you a Lyme test because if you didn't have a rash and you don't remember being bitten, it's just impossible that you would have Lyme disease. And so I went home and I spoke to my mum. And when I spoke to my mum was like, do you know how common this disease is in Bulgaria? She was like, everyone knows about Lyme disease in Bulgaria. If you start showing symptoms like yours, the first thing doctors do is test you for Lyme disease. She said to me, if you got bitten by a bug, you would never even know. And she had a friend who had a son who had Lyme disease. So she kind of put two and two together that it's really possible that what I'm going through is indeed Lyme disease. And so the following day, I contacted that private doctor's secretary and I said, please, I need to see him again. So I went to see him and I said, look, I've spoken to my mom. She told me about how Lyme disease is really common in Bulgaria. She told me how she knows of someone who had it and the symptoms are really similar. Please, could you test me for Lyme disease? And he was really hesitant, but eventually we talked him into it. And I did the blood test. I got the results back and there it was, positive for Lyme disease.
To sum up, you were sick and suffering for over 10 years. Not one national health system doctor ever thought Lyme disease. Then you proceeded to see a private rheumatologist who ran through the gamut of autoimmune diseases, all of which came back negative, and then said it could be Lyme, but Lyme doesn't exist here. Then upon your mother's observations that everybody has Lyme in Bulgaria, it's very common, you asked for the test, the private rheumatologist ran the test, and you came back positive.
Yeah.
What was that like to know that, number one, it's definitively not in your head, it's not psychological, and now you have a name to what's been making you sick for all this time?
Honestly, it was super emotional. All kinds of emotions were going through my head. I was angry. I was upset. I was relieved because finally I knew that what I had known this whole time wasn't in my head, was confirmed that it wasn't in my head. But I was also just angry and upset that I had been let down for so long. The funny thing is, the first thing that came to my head was, how many other people have gone through this and have gone undiagnosed? And I feel kind of lucky in a way because I'm a fighter, but eventually I worked out that it's not in my head. And so I sought out help myself. But how many people take their doctor's advice at face value and just go along with everything they say and just carry on getting worse and worse and worse? That was what was going through my head. How many people are suffering but are in the same situation as me without answers?
On that note, what advice would you give others that are in that situation, that are being given advice by doctors, being mistreated, and are getting worse and worse and worse and are suffering? What would you recommend to them that you wish you would have done differently?
Oh, I wish that I just followed my gut instinct and that I would have just went and sought advice from another doctor, because one thing I've learned is that you know your body better than anyone. And no matter how many qualifications or years of medical school someone has, they don't know you the way you know yourself. And so my advice is, if somebody tells you there is nothing wrong with you and you keep having these symptoms, to just seek help from somebody else and go to somebody else and keep trying and don't give up until you get answers. Because I've definitely learnt that, for one, a lot of doctors don't know too much about Lyme disease, and the ones that do really don't know what to do to help us. And that's just the sad reality.
And on that note, Stela, even once you're diagnosed with Lyme disease, it doesn't mean you're going to get the proper treatment or the proper advice from your doctor. So what did this rheumatologist, this private rheumatologist, do to treat the Lyme disease that you now had based on the diagnosis that he had given you?
Well, he said to me how Lyme disease is not that difficult to treat. He said, you just take 3 weeks of doxycycline and you'll be fine. But he said to me, because my symptoms are quite severe, he'll give me 4 weeks instead of the recommended 3 weeks, and he'll up my dose. And then that way we'll be 100% sure that I'll be Lyme-free, and that will be it. He said it might take a couple of more months for the sort of arthritic symptoms to calm down, But other than that, I'll be completely Lyme free within a month. And I was like, wow, this is great. I'm going to get my life back in a month. That's what I thought at the time.
And what happened when you started the treatment? Did you feel better? Did you feel worse? How did you react to the antibiotics over this 4-week window?
Oh my goodness. I was so sick. I remember the first day I took my first pill of doxycycline. Within 20 minutes, I was vomiting. I was so sick. And the duration of the time, which bear in mind was 4 weeks that I was on doxycycline, I was constantly sick or nauseous. There was no in between. And my seizures started to get even more frequent. And he didn't explain to me that I could possibly have Herxheimer reactions. That is something I researched for myself and found out because I was so worried by the reaction I was getting to the medication. And one evening, my seizure was so severe, I think it lasted, I don't know, like way over an hour. It was really scary. And I don't know, I was completely out of it. My husband called an ambulance because it was that bad. The ambulance came, they took me to hospital. And when they saw me, when the hospital staff saw me, they said, well, there's nothing wrong with you. We can't see anything wrong with you. You're talking fine. You look fine. You're not seizing. There's nothing wrong with you. And I went home. I tried to explain to them that I had tested positive for Lyme disease, that I was on strong antibiotics, and they said, what's Lyme disease? That is literally what they said to me. What is Lyme disease?
So Stella, once you finished this 28-day course of doxycycline and you weren't feeling better, what did you do and what were your next steps?
So I went back to this rheumatologist and I said to him, look, I've finished the course of antibiotics, but my symptoms are worse now. I'm now having severe neurological issues. I'm having seizures. My knees are exactly the same. Nothing has changed. And, you know, you told me that after a month I'm going to feel fine and I'm going to be Lyme free. And in my head, I knew I wasn't because my symptoms had gotten worse. And he said to me, what you're telling me is impossible. Well, his actual words were, you're making up stories. That were his actual words to me. And I'll never forget that he said that to me. And I didn't have it in me to say anything at the time. I was just listening to him. And he said to me, you know, if I revert back to my previous notes, I did believe you could have lupus or rheumatoid arthritis. And he said, looking at your knees, yes, you do have severe swelling. And he said, it looks like a dog and it barks like a dog, but it's not a dog. So I'm going to treat it like a dog. And I'll never forget those words. And so he said to me, even though you tested negative for rheumatoid arthritis, I'm going to put you back on steroids. I'm going to give you those steroids that you previously took that made you unwell. And I'm going to put you back on those steroids. I was doing really badly on those steroids. He told me to come off of them when I was doing badly on them. And now he wants to put me back on them when my symptoms are even worse. I left his office. I took the prescription for steroids. I never exchanged that prescription and I never went back to see him ever again.
Now that you're pretty much doctorless, you're the worst you've ever felt, you've been on a failed 28-day course of antibiotics, what did you do next at this point?
Honestly, I was just going back to what I was doing. I was laying in bed all day, being bedbound. I started doing my own research online and things like that. But my husband, he's very much into the naturopathic way. He's very much into herbal treatments and herbal supplements. He's always believed in that. And he actually purchased a book off Amazon called The Lyme Solution by Dr. Darren Ingalls, who's an American naturopathic doctor. And he didn't even tell me. He read the book, and after he had read it, he said to me, you know what, this book is really amazing. And I couldn't even read at the time because I had severe vision problems. I had severe migraines. There was no way I could read. So he read it for me. And he was relaying to me what this doctor was saying in his book. And I was like, wow, he sounds amazing. Plus, he had Lyme disease himself. And so my husband suggested that we call his office in the USA and see if there's some way we can get hold of him, because we couldn't find any specialist in the UK that helps with Lyme disease, because we were both looking and there was absolutely nowhere in the UK that treats Lyme disease. And within a few days, his secretary contacted us and said, yeah, we can arrange a Skype phone call for you to speak to Dr. Ingalls, and he's going to go through your whole history and everything like that. And if you have any blood work or anything, please send it over. So we did that. And I spoke to him. He was actually amazing. He was the first doctor I spoke to that made me feel like I wasn't crazy. He completely understood all the symptoms I was talking about. I think we had something like a 2-hour conversation. And he said, yep, everything you're talking about is typical Lyme symptoms. And he said, you know, without the blood test, I could even diagnose you, because Lyme has always been a clinical diagnosis and the blood work is always used as just like a backup. He said to me, based on everything I've said, all my history and the blood work I had presented to him, that he said he has no doubt I have Lyme disease. And so that was the second doctor who confirmed I had Lyme. And we spoke about all these herbs and how when he had Lyme, he did something called the Zhang protocol. And so I was willing to give that a go and go down the herbal route.
Stella, did you say that was a Zhang protocol?
Yeah. You know, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, whether it's Zhang or Zhang, but it's ZHANG protocol.
And that's an herbal protocol, correct?
Yeah.
How did that work for you, the Zhang protocol?
I found it extremely difficult because it was a lot of tablets. When the package came to my house, so because it was coming from the States, I had to wait something like 2 months, even longer, because it had to go through customs and all this, and it was a massive box. When it turned up to my house and I opened the box, my jaw dropped. I couldn't believe how many pills were in the box. And I do highly believe in herbal protocols, but once I started it, I just wasn't able to keep up with it because it was so many pills. I had really bad brain fog, so I couldn't keep up with the amount of pills I was supposed to take. And because I was still experiencing lots of stomach issues, I was getting really bad reflux. And so that was really affecting me. And after taking them for, I don't know, I didn't even take them for that long. Maybe it was a couple of weeks. I decided to get back in contact with Dr. Ingalls just to explain to him the issues I was having, because I was unable to take them consistently just because of the sheer volume of the amount of tablets I was taking. I spoke with him and he said, you know, I actually know of a private clinic in the UK that treats patients like yourself, and he gave me the details of it. It's called the Breakspear Clinic, and he gave me the details of it, and he said, you know, you might really benefit from speaking to somebody in your own country who can see you, who can monitor you, that kind of thing, and see how you go, and we can just kind of change the supplements as and how we need to based on what they say and that kind of thing. So I was like, wow, there's a place in England that can help me. Literally the next day, I called the Breakspear Clinic. I spoke to them. They were able to get me an appointment with a Lyme literate doctor, which was incredible. I never ever thought I'd be able to see a Lyme literate doctor in the UK. Within, I think it was about a month, I waited to see her. And she, again, went through the whole history and everything with me. I spoke to her about the previous blood tests I had done and everything like that. And so she decided to run a hell of a lot of tests. So I had the Armin Labs test done, which is the one for Lyme disease. They test co-infections as well. I had a viral panel done. I had a bunch of allergies done, basically everything. I got a bunch of tests done, and the Armin Labs results came back, and sure enough, I was positive for Lyme and a bunch of co-infections, including Bartonella, Babesia, Clichia, Anaplasma, Mycoplasma, Yersinia. And I was like, oh my God, I've been dealing with Lyme disease and co-infections and viruses for this whole time, not getting any help for it. And I was like, oh my God. So the first thing she did was she put me on an antiviral medication called acyclovir, because she explained to me how if you start Lyme treatment, it's possible it's not going to be so effective, because if your body's fighting viruses, I tested positive for EBV, which is glandular fever, and the Epstein-Barr, which is mono. And she said, you know, if you're fighting these chronic viruses, you're going to have a hard time with the Lyme treatment because it's not going to take full effect. She was explaining to me how with all my digestive issues and my gut problems, everything like that, my body is not absorbing the medication properly as well. So that's going to have an issue. I also tested positive for mold and all these other things. And now I know that these are all opportunistic things that kind of are in your body, but it takes something like Lyme disease to severely wreck your immune system for these things to really take effect.
So Stella, how did you feel at this point? Because at first you thought you were just battling Lyme. Now you realize that you have all of these co-infections and opportunistic bacteria that are making you sick, and it just further complicates your illness. So what sort of reaction did you have when you got these Armin Labs results back?
You know what, I took it a lot better, because at that point I knew that there was something wrong. And I knew that the antibiotics I had taken hadn't done anything, because I was feeling not only the same, but worse. So at that point, I felt really, I know it sounds weird to say, but I felt happy because I finally had clear answers to what was going on, and I had a plan and something was going to be done. So I was just grateful.
Stella, this was about, 2-3 months ago. This is very recent that you went to the Breakspear Clinic and got diagnosed, right?
Yeah, very recent.
So how long have you been on this treatment with Breakspear? It's just about 2 to 3 months?
Yeah, so I was on the antivirals for a couple of months, and then I had a discussion with my doctor now, talking specifically for Lyme and co-infections, and we looked at all the possible options, and we did look at intravenous antibiotics, we looked at penicillin injections, but she explained to me that because my symptoms are so severe, that I am too unwell to go down the intravenous route, and it would be a high risk for me to go down the intravenous route. And so we decided that we were going to do antibiotics. And so I've been on those antibiotics. I'm taking ceftriaxone, I might be saying that wrong. And I'm doing regular blood work just to make sure that everything is okay while I'm on these antibiotics. And we're going to review me in about a month's time, because she said, you know, if we're doing antibiotics, we need to switch up the antibiotics every few months, because your body kind of gets used to the antibiotics and then it stops taking effect. So she said, you know, if all goes well and we can carry on with the antibiotics, she wants me to do it for roughly a year, minimum a year, and to keep changing them every few months. But we haven't ruled out intravenous or penicillin injections or anything like that. I'm still very much in the early stages, but just for now, I am doing this antibiotic route and just really hoping that it works out.
So Stella, you are also on, you mentioned that in addition to the antivirals you're on first, and then the antibiotics that you started after the antivirals, that you've been on naltrexone for the pain. So can you talk to us about what naltrexone actually is and how it's helping you with your pain?
I take it because it helps with my pain. And she explained to me that I have severe nerve damage, which is caused by the Lyme. And because of that, the naltrexone helps to repair the nerves and to basically help me manage my pain a little bit better.
How are you feeling today? We know you're only 2 months into your treatment, and we know that you're finally at a place where you know what's going on. You have the big picture. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. You know, I'm still struggling. I still have the same symptoms. My symptoms haven't gone, but the difference is I now have hope. And I have seen a slight improvement. So my seizures are less frequent now, which is great. And I don't know if I mentioned, I have severe asthmatic issues, which I found out through Breakthrough as well, because I had really horrible issues with breathing. I still do, but I feel like the treatment I'm on is helping me with my breathing quite a lot. There would have been no way I could talk to you for this amount of time a few months ago. So I am seeing small improvements. So I'm feeling grateful and I'm feeling hopeful as well.
I think this has to be doing probably more than you're even realizing, because you're not only able to have the endurance in order to be able to speak with us, but you're really thoughtful and you're really careful and really articulate. So I think you're somebody who doesn't give yourself enough credit for a lot of the things that are going on, including how well you're doing now, because we are unbelievably impressed with how smart and capable you are.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. Yeah, I think perhaps all the years of being constantly knocked down has possibly made me that way. But I'm working on trying to be a bit more lighter with myself about how I've coped and everything I've been through. Because even just recently, I finally managed to get admitted into hospital for all the neurological issues, and I was in hospital, and this was only at the end of November. And, you know, I had the MRIs, I had the EEG, everything. And once again, they told me there was nothing wrong with me. So even knowing that I knew that there was something wrong with me, when they said that to me, I almost found it laughable, because I know now what I didn't know back then. So now, well, I can't get out very much. I'm still very much housebound, but I do a lot of social media. And I am constantly talking about Lyme disease and my journey, and talking about the ups and the downs, and trying my best to spread awareness and educate people in whichever way I know how. And I'm constantly getting messages from people saying to me, you know, I never knew about Lyme disease, and now I know so much about it. And I feel really happy that I could spread the word and spread awareness.
And you're doing that beautifully, which is how we ultimately located you. You have a beautiful Instagram where you're sharing really beautiful images and you are sharing really beautiful stories about your journey. And I don't think you'd be able to do that as well as you are if you weren't substantially further along in your healing journey. But even more importantly, I don't think you'd be able to have the kind of confidence you have now to stand up to the medical professionals who aren't diagnosing you properly if you weren't in a better place emotionally and physically. So I think your journey has been beautiful, and I think you've portrayed it beautifully. But what's exciting to me, and I'm sure, I don't want to speak for Matt, but I'm sure he feels the same way, is that I feel very confident that you're going to heal substantially at a faster rate than you had before, because you're now in a place where you can emotionally and physically take the steps you need to take to advocate for yourself and ultimately go to a healthy place in your healing journey.
Yes, I completely agree with you. I just feel it doesn't matter what any health professional says to me, because I know I'm not crazy, and I do my best to relay that to others in similar situations, and to just kind of be a beacon for them to see that they are not alone, and there is help and there is light at the end of the tunnel, and to just not give up. because there is help. You just need to really advocate for yourself, which I think a lot of people find hard to do. And I think still now that's the saddest part. I just wish more people would believe in themselves more.
So one of the other observations I'd like to make is that you started this podcast out by talking about your athletic pursuits. And then you talked about your artistic pursuits. And what I think is really beautiful is how Lyme, your athleticism, and your artistic pursuits have all come together on your Instagram. You have this really beautiful Instagram where you are beautifully muscled, very flexible. You use beautiful colors, and then you're using that to tell your Lyme journey. So, you know, it's been really exciting for me, and I think for Matt as well, to watch this journey that you've just shared with us where the kid who had a certain aptitude athletically and an aptitude artistically is now been transformed into somebody who's using those skills and those aptitudes to tell a Lyme journey in a very beautiful and powerful and I think really intelligent way.
Thank you. You know, I still can't believe that I'm still doing yoga because when I'm in my house, I can't walk, so I get around on crutches. And when I go out of the house, I'm in a wheelchair. And I'm in a wheelchair. That's just how I am. I'm really hopeful that I will get out of that one day, but I am aware it's going to be a slow journey. But I'm okay with that as long as I know I'm progressing. But I think people find it really difficult to fathom that somebody who's in a wheelchair and who's so poorly is still able to pursue their dreams of yoga and to still be able to spread a message of positivity and, despite being so ill, still live a good life. Because I do have a good life. I know that. I have an amazing husband, and I have a cat and I have a house, and you know, things are great. Just my health isn't great, but we are getting there. And yeah, I think my yoga definitely plays a huge role in that. Really does.
So I'm going to ask you one last question. You've been really generous with your time and your beautiful story. But if God forbid tomorrow your husband came in to see you and he said he found a tick biting him on his leg, what advice would you give to him so that he wouldn't have to go through the challenging journey you've had to go through in order to protect his health?
You know, I've done so much research on this now. I always say to people, carry a tick removal tool with you. Oh, it's so important. I wish more places had a tick removal tool available, but it's so easy to get off places like Amazon now. But if he did have that, I would say to him, clean the area thoroughly with rubbing alcohol. And if there's tweezers around, just get the tweezers, or if there's no tweezers, find some tweezers. Get right down to the skin as possible, as close as you can get to the tick's head. And just remove it slowly. Just pull up and firmly. Don't jerk. Just steady straight up and get it out. And then once it's out, just clean the area again. Clean your hands. Use rubbing alcohol. And if, you know, the head breaks off or anything like that, just, again, use the tweezers to pull it out. There's no problem. Once somebody has removed it, I would always say, please go to your doctor and ask for a Lyme disease test. And if it comes back negative, just wait a few weeks and get it done again, because Lyme symptoms take a while to develop and they won't necessarily come back positive within the first few weeks. And I would just say, be vigilant. A lot of us, especially in the yoga community, we do a lot of outdoor yoga, and there's this big trend about yoga retreats, and it's always out in the nature, out in woods, places like that. And people just go there and they don't really think about ticks or these bugs that could potentially cause something like Lyme disease. So I would just say, be vigilant, check yourself, look behind your ears, behind your knees, and your armpits, all these places where ticks have the ability to hide that you wouldn't necessarily think to look. Wear bright colors if you can, and ideally cover up, and always have bug spray. I can't go anywhere without bug spray now. That is just a must. And whenever you come back from anywhere in nature, camping, hiking, wherever, put your clothes in the dryer at a high temperature, because I don't think a lot of people realize that ticks can live on fibers for a certain amount of time. So it's important to kill off any ticks that you can't see. So yeah, I think that would be my advice. And just be vigilant, take care of yourself, be aware.
Thank you for listening to the Tick Bootcamp interview with Stela Sulzdorf. To our listeners, we have a call to action. First, if you'd like to learn more about Stela Sulzdorf, please visit her beautiful Instagram at Stela Sulzdorf. Second, if you enjoyed this episode of the Tick Bootcamp podcast, please share it with your friends by using the social media buttons you see at the bottom of the post. Third, we here at Tick Bootcamp have created a Tick Bite Blueprint that has been inspired by the information that has been shared with us by past podcast guests. We urge you to visit our website at www.tickbootcamp.com to view the blueprint. We would appreciate it if you would contact us with any suggestions you have for improvements. Fourth, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Play Music, or Spotify to get the automatic episode updates of our Tick Bootcamp podcast. And finally, we thank you, our listeners, for your comments on our past podcast episodes. Please take a minute to leave us an honest review on iTunes, on Instagram, or on our website. We make it a point to read every single one of the reviews we get. Thank you for listening.